It's Fully Threaded Radio, episode 209.
So I said, well, we're going to have to get some better lube. And you're allowed to lube them on the job site.
It's time for Fully Threaded Radio.
It is Fully Threaded Radio, voice of the FCH Sourcing Network. Hey everyone, Eric Dudas with you here again, and it's episode 209, right on the heels of our last episode. This one's going to drop January 23rd, 2025. Today's podcast is a conversation with good friend of the show, Carmen Vertullo, along with John O'Brien. He's the president and co-owner actually, of Skidmore-Wilhelm, the widely used and venerated torque tensioning tester that you've heard Carmen speak about so often, and that is in such wide use, especially in the area of structural bolting. This is a great conversation. We don't just talk about torque tensioning. You know, that could get a little dull even for folks who are into that kind of thing. They cover some great stories, some application issues, and we even touch on an issue that affects everyone who drives down the highways. And this is a kind of a shocker, but we also get into some of the specifics of Skidmore-Wilhelm devices that you might not have been aware of. And it's just overall a lot of fun and very informative. I've been wanting to do this one since I met John back in May during Fastener Training Week. He's a great guy, full of knowledge, and kind of a mad scientist, as you'll soon hear. Of course, Carmen and he play off each other really well, and I think you're really going to enjoy this one. Fully Threaded Radio is made possible only with the help of our partners. Let them know you appreciate it, everyone. The title sponsors of Fully Threaded Radio: Brighton Best International. Tested, tried, true, Brighton Best. Goebel Fasteners. Quality the first time. Go Goebel. And Star Stainless. Right off the shelf, it's Star. Fully Threaded is also sponsored by Buckeye Fasteners, BTM Manufacturing, Eurolink Fastener Supply Service, Fastener Technology International, InSequel Software, Fastener Fair USA, J-Land Franco, Solution Industries, Volt Industrial Plastics, and Worth Industry North America. Let them know you appreciate it, folks. And let us know whatever is on your mind about the podcast, the FCH Sourcing Network, or really anything related to fastening or the fastener industry. The email, ftr@fullythreaded.com. Again, you're going to like this conversation, probably learn a few things, and you'll definitely have another reason to stop by the Buckeye Fasteners booth next time you see them at a trade show because, well, you'll find out. Has something to do with chapstick. There's your hint. All right. Thanks for clicking in, everyone. Here's that conversation with John and Carmen. Well, here we are with the first full-length segment of the 2025 podcast season, and this is one that I've been wanting to do since May of last year when I participated in the Fastener Training Institute Fastener Week in Cleveland and had a chance to travel to Independence with my good friend Carmen Vertullo. Well, we'll let that unfold as we talk further. That's setting this up enough. Right now, I'd like to introduce two guests that I've got with me. Mr. Skidmore and Mr. Wilhelm. Now, which one of you is which? Fill me in.
That's depending on the day. One was a sales guy and one was the engineer. I'm probably more of the sales guy, but that's okay.
Okay, well, let's fill the blanks in on that one. John O'Brien, you're the big cheese over there at Skidmore-Wilhelm. Of course, our other guest is Carmen Vertullo. I'm so glad to have you guys on.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So there's a story that goes with that little intro, isn't there?
For how Skidmore met Wilhelm? Is that what you're referring to?
No. He's talking about something else. And you probably don't even remember this, John.
Yeah, you warmed this one up for me yesterday, Carm. Fire away on that.
Several years ago, John, you and I did a floor show, I guess you could call it training, on the bolt tension calibrator at Vegas, the Vegas Fastener Show, the IFE.
I remember.
And we were up there on the stage. We had the unit up there. We had some videos. And I started off by saying what we're going to talk about. And I said, I'm Mr. Skidmore. This is Mr. Wilhelm. And some people laughed, but I had to clarify that it was a joke later. But a lot of people didn't get the clarification. And people were thinking I was Skidmore and you were Wilhelm for the longest time.
So hopefully they treated you well, you know.
Oh, it came with great honor.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Well, those are venerated names to anybody who's been in the industry for a while. And Carmen, you certainly mention Skidmore-Wilhelm torque tension testing equipment frequently in your various work. And it's a huge topic, obviously, technically. So where do we dig into all this? I guess we could start with talking about the subject of torque tension in general, you know, before we kind of delve off from there.
Before that, Eric, I'd like to tell you something about John that he might not even know about himself. And I've known him for a while. We've been in classrooms together. I'll tell you how he came into the Fastener Training Institute back in the day later on. But John does more than the Skidmore-Wilhelm company. He's got a group of companies under his umbrella, Tungsten Capital Partners. And I don't think he has any idea how significant the Skidmore-Wilhelm bolt tension calibrator and the associated equipment is in the industry, because he has other lines. It's a brand. And it's kind of like he probably has 3 or 4 other things going on, at least, that are equivalent to this in his business life or better. I don't even know. But rarely do you see a product in any space, let alone fasteners, that does not have significant competition. John has no competition on this product. I don't see another brand out there. And Skidmore is, you would think it's a generic word, but it isn't. When people talk about the Skidmore, they know exactly what you're talking about. There's only one place to get it. There's only one place that makes it. There's not another company in the United States, anyway, that I know of that makes anything like it. You would think it would have long ago been replaced with some electronic gizmo, but no, it's ubiquitous, it's everlasting, and it is the tool that makes all the difference in the world to make sure not just our structures go up reliably, but also in plants and automotive, other places. We think of the Skidmore-Wilhelm mainly in the context of structural bolting, and that's probably its main role. But it's used in many other torque tension tightening strategy applications, from medical to automotive. I use several of them here every day in our lab. So I hope John knows that. If he didn't know it before, he knows it now, and so does everybody else.
Well, it's been a fascinating journey. My partners and I bought the company in 2006, and we knew that it was involved in structural steel, and our product had to be used. And we started revamping and revitalizing the company in terms of technology and using, when we bought the company, every recalibration of every Skidmore was on a note card, handwritten. Every time it had come back in, we would handwrite a new journal entry on the note card and determine that it had been recalibrated that year. So I wrote a piece of software that automated that whole thing. But it was fascinating when we were converting it. All of the early customers of Skidmore were Ford Motor Company, General Motors. They were all industrial fastener companies, and a few structural steel. But the problem of torque tension back, and this was the early 1950s, was so prevalent, and these companies needed to figure out what they were doing in terms of torque tension relationship. And so I was floored when I saw that the who's who of list of people that were using our equipment or back in the day did use it. And in most instances, they figured out what they were doing, and they don't use the Skidmore every day. But in structural steel, they have to use it every day because it's that important. So yeah, thank you for mentioning it, Carmen. But yes, we try not to take advantage of our monopoly status. It's still a relatively small company, and our main focus now is supporting the people who are nice enough to use our products and get them solutions to the problems that they encounter.
John, just to be clear, when, to your knowledge, did the tool actually come into existence? When was it actually first used?
So it's funny. The story behind it was there was a high school that was being built in the Cleveland area, and Skidmore and Wilhelm had started a machine shop, and I can tell you that story if you'd like. And the engineer of record who was building this high school, it was his first project using bolts instead of rivets. And he was a smart guy and said, "How do I know these bolts are tight?" And so somebody directed him to Dick Skidmore, who was the Skidmore of Skidmore-Wilhelm founding. And he was an engineer from Case Western Reserve University, a fine university here in Cleveland, engineering school. My partner also went there. And over the weekend, he invented a device that would allow you to at least measure the tension in a bolt, and you could correlate that to your torque wrench, and that was how you knew that you were getting a tight bolt. So it was 1954. And the reason I know that is because we have all the records of every unit we've ever sold. And coincidentally, I had a customer about 5 years ago show up with serial number 102. And they started at 101. So it was the second unit ever made, and it was still in use 60 some years later. And I forced them to sell it back to me, and I gave them a brand new unit in exchange. So I have unit 102 back in our facility.
Oh, wow. That's a great story.
I need to figure out how to do something with it. It's currently sitting in the closet somewhere, but
Oh, no, that baby needs to be enshrined, man,
I
in your
think so.
facility there.
If they ever come up when they induct Carmen into the bolting Hall of Fame, maybe we can put this Skidmore next to it, because he's been integral into our growth in this industry.
Yeah, well, it needs to go somewhere for sure. Well, the IFI is right down the street practically from where you are. Hey, let me set the picture for listeners a little bit, because I went there again with Carmen in May. He actually dragged in his suitcase all the way from San Diego a couple of your units that he wanted to have tweaked. I don't know exactly what was going on there, Carm. You can tell me, but he had these things packed in suitcases, and he needed something. So after one of the classes, we drove over there together, and we went in by the loading dock in your facility, and it's like a mad scientist's lair in there. I mean, this is all kinds of stuff. I mean, there's shelves everywhere. It looks like I've seen Fastenal branches with fewer, parts on the shelves, and all kinds of stuff too. Like Carm was saying at the beginning of the segment here. I mean, you're doing a lot of things over there, and so into this facility, we walked with these two units, and I didn't go in the front door, so I don't know if you have much of a showpiece lobby there.
We do not. We're an old school industrial company. We have very little office space, and it's all in the plant. And as you can imagine, when you have a company was started in the 40s, and some of our other companies were started even earlier than that, you collect a whole bunch of memorabilia that you just can't seem to figure out how to get rid of or make something out of. So we'll figure it out someday, I suppose. But yeah, we have a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, from time to time, people bring up this idea of a fastener museum, and there's been a couple of attempts at that, of course. Mel Kirshner, was it, Carm, out there in California, had one for many years that eventually burned down. You know that story, right?
I had the privilege of being able to visit that museum once on I guess back in the day, wasn't PAC West, it was Western Association of Fastener Distributors meeting. We went there here in Alpine near San Diego, and one of our infamous fires, which thank God right now, I don't know, as we're listening here, Los Angeles is burning to the ground, but we're relatively safe in San Diego. I hope we stay that way because all of our firefighters are up there.
Wow.
But that museum was amazing. It was made entirely out of wood. I don't know if it's pine, looked like pine, knotty pine, and his beautiful home. Everything lost.
What a shame.
A lot of material he had, and do you know what year that was that it burned?
I do not, but I bet you a quick Google search will tell me. So
I'll have to get something together on that. For years, we've been threatening to do a retrospective on that, and I guess it's due. But looking to the future, we've heard other folks. I know that Brighton has talked about doing something in their Cleveland facility too, so that might be something we could connect dots on too here.
I know it was before the days of the iPhone or phones with cameras on them, because I remember having a digital camera with me and I took some pictures and I wish I could find them. Because hopefully there are others that have taken pictures and we could find something around that.
So what was it that we were doing that day with those 2 units that you brought over to John's facility? What were you trying to do?
Here's the interesting thing. And by the way, Eric, I believe in my fastener training minute, I transposed the MS and MZ model numbers. So we need to fix that, or at least I need to look at it and see. So in the structural bolting area, there are 2 models, the MZ, which is the older unit. Is that right, John? It goes to 126 KSI, 126 kips.
Yeah, that's our newest unit. That's the lion's share of Skidmores we sell today.
All right. And then before that was the MS.
Correct.
And it was the same unit, but made out of steel.
Yes.
And what is the big one that goes to 170?
So that is currently the HS. That started as the H.
Okay. Well, I have 2 of them, both of which, by the way, acquired at the graciousness of John. And he supports me a lot when I need a part. And rarely do I see an invoice, which is, you don't need to put that in the podcast, but thank you, John. But I probably sold several, I don't know, maybe dozens of these just by I've literally forced people into buying them, shamed people into buying them.
I know. I've heard those pitches, Carm, on the podcast and all other places. John, you ought to think about at least setting Carm up with a T-shirt or an ashtray or something.
Oh,
absolutely.
I'm fine. So I have this Model H or HS, I guess, and also I have the MZ. Now, back in the day, these things were made out of steel, and they came in this horrible steel case with a handle. If you carried it would cut your fingers off. And they were heavy, and they were bulletproof. But John figured out, since when he took over the company, that he could make the base of the unit, or I guess the housing, out of aluminum. And it would still be just as good, if not better. So these newer units are made out of aluminum. They're lighter weight. They come in really cool Pelican cases with wheels, and we needed that on the job site the day before yesterday. I'll tell you about that story. But my 2 units, one of them got abused pretty badly, and it needed not just a calibration, but some reconditioning. It was leaking. And the other one just needed calibrated. And I happened to be coming back to Cleveland for whatever was going on, all kinds of good stuff, trade show, stuff at the IFI. And they are heavy, so shipping them is expensive. And the downside also is when these things are in shipping and when they're in calibration, you don't have them available for use. So I needed to minimize that amount of time. And I thought they got these cool Pelican cases. I'll put them in the Pelican cases and we'll take them. Well, it turns out in the Pelican case, they were over 50 pounds. So I took them and wrapped them in a moving blanket, and I put them in a standard suitcase about the size of what you could do in a carry-on an airplane. And Southwest gives you 2 free bags. So I shipped them on Southwest. And those bags don't have much of a weight limit. I think they're about 50 pounds, and I was able to get them under that. And I took them back there, and I showed up there and on the loading dock with these 2 suitcases, and the guys came out and they shook their heads and they said, "What the hell is this?" And John said, "Take care of him. He wants to pick these up at the end of the day." And it just worked. I picked them up at the end of the day after our session at the IFI, got them home, no downtime, calibration certificates, everything was gold. And I'm not saying that Skidmore can do that for everybody or anybody in particular, but their service department is amazing. They're very competent people. It was really cool. They had some units in work when we were there that we got to see and explain to us how the calibration works. And so that was a very, very cool trip. And, I don't think that most labs do a lot of structural bolting work. I will tell you this. Most labs that, for example, the Division of State Architect labs that are certified by the state of California, of which we're not one yet, they don't know much about fasteners, and they commonly make errors in all kinds of bolting, structural bolting, and other fastener testing applications, and we get to straighten them out from time to time. But as bulletproof and I want to say idiot proof as a Skidmore is, there are still things that people can do wrongly to abuse the tool or to get incorrect results. And in some cases, they don't know how the tool works, so they don't understand how to troubleshoot it. Fortunately, if someone is trained, the RCSC standard, Research Council on Structural Connections, it's their guide for the installation of high-strength bolting, tells us whenever you are doing what's called the PIV test, the pre-installation verification test, which is the main use for the bolt tension calibrator, and something's not right, you should stop and investigate it before you proceed. That is, before you put the bolts in the steel, before you decide to reject the bolts, before you throw up all over the place and have a meltdown and try to make your supplier take the bolts back, investigate the cause. And it's not common, but it's certainly possible that the cause can be the user doesn't know exactly how to use the tool or how to read the tool or what the value should be. So it's important that they be calibrated. I don't know, John, do you ever see one come in and it's out of calibration, or do they hold pretty well?
Usually they hold very well. If it's out of calibration, it's usually because it's been damaged, or we do, believe it or not, see some units that go to calibration houses and they try and adjust it on their own because their setup isn't exactly right. And so you can adjust the gauge and put it out of calibration, and that's typically what we'll see. If something's more than, say, 5% out of calibration, it usually means that it's been manually put in that state. It's very rare for us. We calibrate to within 1% of reading, and it's very rare for us to get a unit back that's out of that tolerance by more than 1% or 2%.
And as these kind of instruments go, that's a very good standard. There are certain other things that you learn along the way, and when we teach our structural bolting clinics here in San Diego or wherever, these are kind of things that people would never know unless they got to hang around John. For example, and John, you can tell Eric to cut this off of the podcast if it's not something I should say.
Okay.
We occasionally have abused our tools by exceeding the maximum value on the dial. For example, the MZ goes to 126 kips. And sometimes if you're doing a certain kind of test, like a row cap, and you have to go a number of degrees, I still have a little bit to go, but I'm already at 126. Can I go in a little bit further and abuse that or not? And most instrument makers would say, no, don't do that, because what will happen is it won't go back to zero and you won't have a good calibration. John said, yeah, you can go a little bit past. As long as it goes back to zero, your tool's good.
Testing the limits, Carm? I can't believe you would do that.
And you would never know that. I mean, it's not something that would ever be advertised, but it's a very robust tool.
Yeah, there is we have safety factors on the top end so that nothing's going to explode or anything like that. But yeah, we appreciate it when people keep it below the limit, but know that if you have to exceed the limit, you can. The good news is we tell everybody what bolt sizes are appropriate for each tool, and we sell the accessories. So, for example, the MZ cannot do 1.5 inch diameter bolt. 1, the capacity is not big enough, and 2, we don't sell adapters so that you can test 1.5 inch bolt on an MZ. It's just not possible. So we know that 1.25 inch is the top you're going to see in that unit, and we can take 1.25 inch bolt to failure, and still the Skidmore will survive, no problem.
Speaking of 1.5 inch, I'll just give you the highlight of a story that you can get the details on in the Fastener Training Minute. A steel erector here in San Diego had failed to do the PIV test on some 1.5 inch A490 structural bolts, which is the largest, strongest structural bolt available. Normally, we have some new standards that have stronger bolts than that, but this is the as far as something you could actually buy, the largest, strongest structural bolt you'll have. And you need to have the HS to test this. And they didn't have one. They couldn't find anyone that had one. They called John, and John said, Carmen has one. So it was literally the bat phone ringing, Carver to the rescue. And we took our HS to the job site where they had already installed And first off, imagine the building that needs an 1.5 A490. These columns look like they belonged in some kind of a skyscraper, but this building was only 4 stories, so we don't understand that yet. So we went up in the steel with the HS, and the issue was their tightening method for these 1.5 A490s was using the direct tension indicator, which is a washer with bumps on it. And that's how you know that the bolt's properly tightened. Well, they failed to do the PIV tests with these washers before they assembled this building. Why? Well, we didn't have a big enough Skidmore, so you just proceed anyway. Incredibly bad risk, very, I don't know how to say it, but I'll just use the word stupid for them to have done that. And fortunately, we were able to show up in a short amount of time, do the test, qualify those direct tension indicators, and got out of there in a couple of hours.
Well, I love that story. You had texted me a picture of the job site that evening, and nothing makes me feel better than to put someone in touch with Carmen Vertullo, because he is the cream of the cream when it comes to people who know bolting. And anytime anyone's having a problem, Carmen will figure out the problem, and if he can fix it, he fixes it. So I'm thrilled that I'm more in the Midwest, but you're out west, and I can rely on you to go visit people when I'm unable. So that was great. I loved it.
Well, I have a long list of those kinds of stories, and someday I think I probably talked about every one of them on the Faster Training Minute at some point, but someday we should compile them because there are lessons to be learned in every single one of them.
Absolutely. I have some great stories as well, and maybe we'll get into some of them as we keep talking. But yeah, there's some fascinating stuff, and it's amazing to me that there are people who are in the structural steel business trying to get out of this pre-installation verification on the job site.
What?
And,
Hey, wait. Hang on. Why would that be?
Well, if you don't know what you're doing and you see it as more of a hassle, and, a lot of bolt distributors will say, well, they passed here, so they're going to pass in the field as well. So why don't we just go, because we hate getting calls from the field that our bolts aren't working. And I always say, time out. There's a reason that they aren't working in the field. We need to figure out what's different between what you did at your facility using Skidmore equipment and what they're doing at the job site using the same equipment. Why isn't it working? Instead of saying, well, we should just stop testing because obviously they don't know what they're doing in the field. Yeah, let's train them how to do it in the field as well. I've been training iron workers since about 6 months after we bought the company. I started training iron workers at locals, and it's amazing the change in their attitude about the Skidmore testing once they realize what they're really doing, and once they determine when there's a problem, how to troubleshoot and fix what's going on. A lot of times it has to do with lubrication on the bolt is compromised, or, for example, tension control bolts. They rely on the lubrication because they're misnamed. They're actually torque control bolts because the spline breaks off in torque, and different climates can affect the lubrication and efficiency thereof. And if you don't test that in the field, yeah, they're going to work great in a 65-degree plant where you're distributing them, but you put them out at 0 degrees in the frozen tundra, and you're going to have an issue.
Right. Well, we're swerving into the infinitely mysterious realm of the K factor, are we not?
Absolutely. And so you don't need to understand what your K factor is. If you have a Skidmore, you can test it, and you don't have to calculate what your K factor is, but at least you know your tightening method using the K factor as it sits today is going to give you the result that you need on the structure. And that's important. And it's funny because I also get it from industrial fastener groups every once in a while. My favorite story is we got a call from a group, a small company that was making dryers, big industrial dryers for, I believe it was, towels and hotels and that type of thing. And they were assembling the drum that went inside their dryer. And for years, they went to their distributor and they bought 1/4 inch 20 bolts. And they didn't realize that those bolts were being bought en masse by this distributor for another big company that we all know that I won't mention. And they were following that spec. Well, that big company changed their spec, and they were smart, and they added a little bit of Teflon to the lubrication on those bolts. And so the poor little mom and pop dryer company starts tightening their bolts, and lo and behold, the torque, they used to use click wrenches to install these bolts in the dryer drum. When it clicked, the click was actually the bolt breaking because the torque was way too high for that bolt. They were actually shearing the bolt. The problem was just the way the device was designed, the bolt was sitting there. So they felt the click. It was actually the bolt breaking. They had no idea because if they felt the click and it sat there. And so then they turn the dryer on, and guess what happens? I mean, the drum just goes flying, and everything when your washer's not properly balanced, you get that noise, and it sounds like the house is going to fall down. Well, imagine that in a dryer that's used to holding 400 sheets at a time. And they called me in a panic, saying, "We don't know what's happening." Well, luckily they called me back after the fact because we sent them a Skidmore. They did some testing. They actually changed same bolt. They changed their torque spec to install the bolts. Their click wrench went down to 10% of what it originally was. So for example, I don't remember the exact numbers, but say it was 15 foot-pounds, they now needed 1.5 foot-pounds to install this same bolt just because the lubrication on the spec for the big company changed and they had no idea. And most companies, that's not something you think about. If you're making washers and dryers, you're thinking about making washers and dryers. You're not thinking about, hey, the bolt spec is crucial to what I'm doing in that instance. So I love telling that story because it really comes home to a lot of different people who install bolts. Every time I teach a class, I relate it, especially to ironworkers, because I relate it back to guys changing their tires on their car.
Okay, now hang on. We've got to talk about something that you brought up while I was talking to you. I forgot exactly when. One of the times I was talking to you, you were thinking of taking up a personal mission about sharing this news about tires coming off of trucks. You had some really alarming statistics on that.
So 3 truck wheels fall off in the United States every day and 1 in Canada. And the industry has they've gotten smart enough to put 550 foot-pounds is what they put on every M20 lug nut on every 18-wheeler. The problem is if you're in San Diego, like my friend Carmen, the K factor is very different than if you're sitting like Eric and I are in the tundra of northern Ohio. And so they know that number makes no sense. 550 foot-pounds on every M20 lug nut doesn't give you consistent results. So what happens? Well, they said, okay, well, let's use 2 drops of oil on every lug nut before we put it on. Well, that's a little vague. And then the people here in Cleveland figure out, that's probably not enough. So I'm going to bump it to 650 foot-pounds, or I'm going to do a 3 count on my impact gun instead of a 2 count. They love to call them ugga-duggas. 2 ugga-duggas on my impact gun instead of 3 or something along those lines. Well, what they're actually doing, since lug nuts are reused bolts, we do not want to take those into yield. Well, imagine if you're taking the lug into yield, and then the third time you install that lug nut on that same lug, you've yielded it, you hit the point where it's yielded, or gone in, I like to call it gone into the plastic phase where it doesn't come back. It's no longer an elastic spring, it's plastic like your old slinky that you used to pull apart. And once you hit that point, again, you could potentially shear that bolt or take it to a point where the first time you hit a bump, you're going to shear that bolt. And the wheel is going to keep that bolt in place. And you don't know that you now have 9 lugs doing the work designed for 10. And then it's my opinion that eventually you get to the point where it cascades and you've got, 7 good lugs. And then all of a sudden you hit a bump and the wheel goes flying down the road. Unfortunately, that industry currently is trying to figure out how to make it so that the nuts aren't backing off of the lugs, which, in my opinion, isn't really a problem to begin with. I think they're over tightening their bolts, not under tightening their bolts. But again, now I can get off my soapbox. That's
Well, since you brought this to my attention, I haven't driven down the highway with the same, thinking. I put the gas on every time I pass a truck.
Absolutely. I always look and make sure that the wheel's not wobbling because it's an issue, and someday they're going to address it. But right now, I think it's probably such a huge liability that everyone's a little bit scared to be the first one to realize it.
Since I learned about this statistic, and I'll tell you how I learned about it in a minute, I always tell my kids and my wife, don't dwell around semi-trucks when you're on the freeway. And also, I've been in the plants and seen some of their bolting practices on other parts of the truck. So don't dwell around semi-trucks on the freeway. So many years ago, when we started the Fastener Training Institute's Certified Fastener Specialist program, back in the day when we had Joe Greenslade and Ben Bendolf and I were doing it in the 90s, one day, Joe Greenslade would always show up with the Skidmore-Wilhelm and a torque wrench, an indicating torque wrench and a clicker.
He pretty much always had that equipment in his trunk, didn't he?
He did.
I think he slept with it.
And it was a small Skidmore. I think a Model P. Is that what the small one is called?
That is the small one, yes.
It's the pocket version, John?
That's right.
So Joe would do a torque tension demonstration, which if you've never seen it, it's a real light bulb moment. That's why I love doing this kind of training for people. We would change something in the joint. We would use a soft washer instead of a hard washer. We would add some lubrication. We would say, what happens, like, okay, this is a brand new fresh nut and bolt, and we're going to tighten it. What happens on the second time or the third time? All kinds of variables you could throw into the equation to learn what happens during that tightening process. And so one day at the end of one of these sessions in Los Angeles, Joe Greenslade hands me the torque wrench and the box with the Skidmore, and he said, "This is yours. I'm done with this." And he retired from it. And so I took over, and I was doing it from then on for several years. And then along came the opportunity to have John present it. And I thought, this is great. We got the Skidmore man himself. He's going to come and give this presentation. And he did a great job. We loved having him. He had a Skidmore that had a pressure transducer attached to it, so he could throw up on the screen what was going on that little dial that you can't see from the back of the classroom.
Oh, cool.
It was freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the things I rail about is people saying fasteners are the most dangerous things on the planet. They are not. They're statistically amongst the safest technology we have, probably safer than drugs, safer than food, safer than, I don't know, a lot of things, safer than guns. Fasteners are amazingly reliable things statistically. And they also are amazingly forgiving. You have to mess up pretty damn bad to make a fastener fail. And not that we have not had fastener failures causing catastrophic things, deaths, and so on. By and large, not very damn many. So I was telling this story, and I said, it's not like the wheels are coming off the wagon all over the place around the country. And John puts his finger up and goes, just a minute, Carmen, they are. And he told me that statistic. And I thought, okay, well, I won't use that line anymore.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, 3 out of how many million trucks are on the road doesn't sound that dramatic. But if you've ever seen a video of a wheel that came off flying down the road, it's not. I mean, it's a death trap. It's not something you want to mess with.
Imagine that thing bouncing down the freeway like a basketball and landing in your windshield.
Yeah, it's amazing. So a lot of fasteners aren't used in industries where it makes that big of a difference. The fastener that holds your doorknob on your door, if it fails, no big deal. You might have to get a locksmith to replace it or something along those lines. But in a lot of industries, it's critical. And wheels is one of them, bridges, skyscrapers, all that kind of stuff. It's important.
Yeah, well, we've talked about aerospace a lot on the podcast. I mean, fasteners are an extremely critical part of all of these fields. So
I have a great story about aerospace. I got a call. We had just bought the company, and Carmen Vertullo is a godsend to me because I learned a lot from him from the very beginning when we started taking over. And I've, fortunately had some good people around me to teach me this stuff because I didn't know it when we bought the company. But
refresh our memory though before you get into that. What year was that you took over the helm over there?
So we bought it in 2006 from John Wilhelm, who was the founder's son, who had taken over. The Skidmores and the Wilhelms had parted ways, but John Wilhelm was still running the business, and we bought it directly from him.
Okay, got it. Well, let's circle back to that history after you tell us this piece.
Okay, sounds great. So I get this call, and I'm a relative newbie. I've figured out torque tension relationship. I figured out my demonstration skills pretty well. This is before we had we call it the virtual gauge. So we had to get up in front of a room, and I got invited to a aerospace company on the West Coast that did a lot of space shuttle work. And I go up and do my demo, and my demo is really simple. I take a Model P, it's a 3/8 inch bolt. I tighten it with a certain amount of torque. I take the nut off. I put cherry chapstick or sometimes strawberry chapstick if I can't find cherry chapstick on the face of the nut, and I'll use the same torque and I'll tighten the same exact bolt, and I'll get a 300% increase in load. So just by adding a little bit of lubrication to the face of the nut dramatically changes that torque tension relationship, or K factor like you called it. So I was in a room in front of literal rocket scientists, and I did this demo, and I had about another 45 minutes to go. And honestly, I did the demo and their jaws were dropped, which amazed me because these were rocket, engineers. And I didn't get another word in for the rest of the meeting. After about 5 minutes of them going back and forth, I just sat down and let them go. It was the easiest demonstration I ever did. My part was 5 minutes, and it was in front of these rocket guys. And man, did they take off with that simple knowledge, that aha moment, that 30-second demo completely changed how they looked at what they were doing. And this was a company that was successfully making space shuttle stuff. So it's amazing to me, the knowledge that you can impart just by a simple tool.
Yeah, it really is. And I tell you, your enthusiasm for all this very much shows through, because before I got to know you, I was at the, it was Brighton Best in their Cleveland facility where we did the fastener training. And in their quality lab, you had yourself set up and you did a demo for us. And there were a lot of eyes opening during that. And I could tell you were just really enjoying that. And you did a great job of explaining all this then at a very remedial level, I might add.
Yes. Oh, I love teaching classes. And it was funny because we have developed that Model P, and it was basically developed for me to do demos. Kenny Waugh with Impact has been very instrumental in our company here. He is a former iron worker, now works for the Iron Workers, the labor management group. And he invited me to come speak at the first ever Impact Labor Management Conference in Orlando back in the day. And it was great because I like to say Mr. Skidmore and Mr. Wilhelm, myself and my partner Dave, showed up. We're high school buddies, if you can believe it. We met in the first day of 5th grade. We show up at this meeting, and I've got a table. And at the time, I think I had a little tent with the Skidmore logo on it. And we were there with Ford Motor Company, Lincoln Electric, 2 other huge companies, and Dave and I were standing there at this meeting. But then I got to teach a class, and I went right after Greg Gumbel, who unfortunately just passed away. But he did a presentation, and I was on next, and it was in front of 700 people. And fortunately, I had the demo unit, so I had it on a big screen. In fact, they had 3 or 4 big screens, and I did my demo, and it was the same thing. I got the biggest kick out of these people who've been bolting for 40 years. Had never seen the difference of lubrication on a bolt, and light bulbs went off. And I'm proud to say that because of those meetings and those teaching segments, the number P is now our number 2 selling unit. Every Snap-on tool training center in the U.S. buys one to teach young budding mechanics and auto aerospace guys the proper torque tension relationship training. And so we sell a whole lot of those Model Ps now, and I'm pretty proud of that.
I hope you also have a line of very overpriced chapstick that you have branded.
Well, it's funny. The reason I used to use Castrol stick wax, and it was actually at the IFI meetings that people would come up, the trainings that Carmen used to do, people would come up to me afterward and said, "Now, what's that Castrol stick wax? I got to get some of that." And in my mind, they were missing the point completely. It wasn't the fact that I had this stick wax that made it easier to put your bolts in. It was that you need to know what the condition is of your bolts and the lubrication within the bolt so that you know that you're properly tightening the bolt. And so then I started to use something as ridiculous as chapstick.
Right.
And and it worked. And everyone laughs. And I have to tell you another funny story since we're talking about it. I did get a call from rural Maine. I believe they were installing, they were putting up wind towers in rural Maine. And the guy called me and he didn't have enough power on his torque wrench to tighten the bolts. Wind towers use pretty big bolts. So he's talking M36 to 64 bolts. So you need a lot of torque to get those going. And he had lost his lubricity. And I said, well, just get some stick wax.
That.
He goes, where am I going to get stick wax? I'm in the middle of the woods and I got to put these in today. And I said, well, is there a drugstore? Can you go get chapstick? And he said, yeah. And so there are some wind towers in rural Maine that were installed because there was chapstick put on the face of the nut. He bought the store out of chapstick and installed their nuts on their bolts using chapstick. So it can work.
Yes. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, Carmen, or if you noticed, but Buckeye Fasteners for years they had at the I don't know if they had it at Fastener Fair. They definitely had it at the Vegas show. A big keg of Old Rusty Bolt, their beer, and this year they switched over from the Old Rusty, and now they have chapstick.
Nice.
So they downshifted a little bit, but now you're giving me an idea. Maybe we should meet this up. Now, John, you don't attend the trade shows, do you? I don't know that I've ever seen you there.
So I went to a few of the trade shows, the Las Vegas shows. Typically, for me, to make it worth our while, we need to be presenting something, and nobody wants to see me present every year after year. So usually I will go when I can present. On the flip side, in structural steel, we're at most of the trade shows. We go to the steel show every year. I do the labor management conference with the ironworkers every year. We do the train the trainer sessions in Ann Arbor with the Ironworkers International. So I do a lot of trade shows, but fortunately I'm old enough that I can decide which ones I can go to, and we've dropped the wind power shows. Although if I'm ever invited to speak, I'd love to go out there, and we'd certainly.
Okay, you know your business. I think I cut you off there, Carmen. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
So I let this cat out of the bag a while back on this discovery that we made. We had a very similar situation where we had to do a PIV test, and we did it on the tailgate of a truck with a Skidmore. And they rented this very high-powered torque wrench. These weren't very big. These were maybe 1.25 inch A325s, hot dip galvanized. But the torque wrench they had, which was electric, was not powerful enough. So I said, well, we're going to have to get some better lube. And you're allowed to lube them on the job site. And that we had two choices that I knew of. One was Johnson's floor wax in a can, which is about $20. And it's nasty. It smells bad. It's sticky and not fun. The other one was TBRW. So I brought both to the job site and I let them choose between the two of them. Now, I didn't used to tell people what TBRW was. It's a closely held secret for many years. But I believe at one time I was doing a Fastener Training Minute, and I said, I'll be at the show, and if you want to know what TBRW is, come to my exhibit, and I will show you, and I will give you some.
This was good.
But now I'm going to let the cat out of the bag again. Here, TBRW is toilet bowl ring wax.
Yes.
And if that town would have had a hardware store instead of a drugstore, you could have gone down there and got a toilet bowl ring for about $1, maybe $1.25 now. and it's the cheapest wax you'll ever have. As a matter of fact, we had a situation where we needed to use it to get some bolts to pass a row cap test here at our lab. And if you use the wax to pass the row cap or the PIV, then you have to use the same exact wax in the steel when you do the erection of the building. And so they had thousands of bolts, and they said, what are we going to do? I said, just go to Home Depot. They're like $10 for a case of them. They're super cheap, and they're real easy to use. It wipes off your hands. It doesn't smell at all. There's no odor to it. If you get it in your mouth, you won't throw up. And it's just got a wonderful consistency to it. It's softer than the stick wax. It's maybe about the same as chapstick, which also smells good. And if you get it in your mouth, you won't throw up. But
That's right.
It's very expensive.
It is, relatively speaking. Sure. Well, that's great. The plumbers of the world unite, right?
I thought I should go buy cases of TBRW and just melt them down into a paint can and sell them as bolt wax.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, that looks like something that you could do at your facility out there, John. You had a paint thing going when we were there. You were doing some kind of a side little gig.
So we do have a business that makes a unit that fills aerosol spray paint cans with custom color paint.
Yeah, that was it.
And it's just a pump, and you pour somebody's paint in the reservoir, and you close the door, and you put a can underneath, and you close the door, and we'll put the paint in the can. And it's a tiny, tiny little business. But again, we like our little niches. We're the only ones who make it in the world, and so I sell that thing all over the world. It's still small, but when you need John Deere green in a can, and you go to your favorite paint store, odds are they're using one of our pumps to pump it into a can.
Yeah, well, like I was saying, it's like a mad scientist's den over there.
Yeah, it is. So my partner and I might have mentioned we met on the first day of 5th grade, and we were both new to the school district. Go Orange High, go Lions! And we sat at what I can refer to as the nerd table, because everyone else knew each other. It was a very small school district, and they'd grown up together. And we were the two outsiders, and we sat at the same table and struck up a conversation. And here we are. That was 1976. And here we are so many years later owning businesses together. And Dave came up with the idea that we should buy companies from guys who want to retire and their kids have left Cleveland, basically. And so that's what we started doing. Once I actually spent some time in San Diego. I owned a glow-in-the-dark driving range in Carlsbad, California. And that's where I met my now wife. It was the greatest day ever. And once summer was over and kids started going back to school, the driving range business dried up. And so I went back to Cleveland, and she was nice enough to join me. And we were married within 6 months and moved back to Cleveland. And that's when Dave and I started looking for these businesses to buy. And
It's a great story.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of them. And we brought on another partner about 10 years ago, Wendy Voshik, who's our head of operations. And it's a nice little team.
So dig back then. Tell me the story about how the company first got started. That's a tale unto itself.
So that's a great story. And that comes from John Wilhelm, who is one of the greatest guys. He was very generous selling us this business. And he was basically looking out for the employees. He was ready to retire, and he didn't want one of the bigger companies to come in from out of town and close it down and move. So he was very loyal to his employees, and we were actually in the building. He tells the story that the foundation, his mother, who was probably 5 feet tall and maybe 85 pounds when I met her, she helped pour the foundation of the building we were in when we originally bought the company. We have since moved, but anyway, his mom and dad lived in Euclid, Ohio, and they're walking down the street and they see somebody's house. Their basement looks like it's on fire. So they go knock on the door, and lo and behold, it was Dick Skidmore, and it wasn't on fire. He was an engineer with Lincoln Electric, designing welding equipment. Now, this is back in the 40s, probably right after the war, I'm guessing. And So they struck up a conversation and a friendship, and a few years later, they decided to open a machine shop together, and the families actually lived together in the same apartment to save money so that they could get this business off the ground. And it's just one of those stories that you just can't believe until you hear it, that they met because of a happy accident. Somebody thought somebody was saving their house, and turns out Dick Skidmore was quite the inventor, and he was the guy that they came to about 5 years later to invent this. And now we still have machines and we do machine stuff for other people, but the lion's share of our business is the Skidmore product line that he invented over the weekend, and it's just expanded from there. And we sell all over the world. Every continent except Antarctica, and there may be one there too. I don't know. I haven't sold it directly to them, but we sell everywhere. About 30% of our business still goes outside of the U.S. So it's just amazing that this company started way back when, and it's still clicking right along.
Sure is.
It is an amazing story, and we kind of started off with another amazing story about Mel Kirshner in the Fastener Museum, and I think I have a little bit of data on that here, if I can share it.
Yes, please.
He started the museum in the mid-90s. I don't know how many years it took him to build it, but it burned in 2003 in October. And I can't remember the name of the fire, but it's a famous Southern California fire. Lots of property was lost. And Mel passed away at age of 77 in 2008, in November of 2008. And he's remembered by lots of memorial stuff online, as well as the Pac West Memorial Golf Tournament, Mel Kirshner Golf Tournament. So I believe someone is trying to establish an online Fastener Museum right now that will include lots of his legacy.
Well, that's interesting. That's good to hear. And we'll have to get our arms around that. You hear rumblings about it. And actually, I was talking with, he was Gary Graham from out here in Cleveland some time ago. And in his travels, he was aware of an old Porteous semi-trailer that was parked somewhere and it had the original paint job on it. It looked very old-timey and very retro. And he was floating the idea that, hey, how about we pile all of this memorabilia, as much as we could, into one of these semis and then make it into a mobile museum and drive it around to all these fastener events. I thought that was a pretty cool idea.
That's a really cool idea.
Well, that sounds like an idea for a segment, Eric.
Sounds like an idea that comes up in a late night bar fastener, bar setting.
You just got to find the right person to take and run with it.
Oh, yeah. Somebody's got to be crazy enough. One of you guys who makes $100 million selling your company, is just twiddling your thumbs. Why don't you jump on this?
Absolutely.
John, I have at my exhibit, and I generally exhibit in the IFE in Las Vegas and also at Fastener Fair this year in Nashville. I generally will bring something with me to that show that's a hands-on demo. Last year, we actually brought a hardness tester and a tensile frame. And I have a very nice little stand with an I-beam on it that we can mount a Skidmore on. And if you want to go to either of these shows, and we can do that show floor auditorium training with the Skidmore, I would be happy to set that up. And you just have to show up.
Yeah, we'll be in May. In May, we'll be in Nashville at Fastener Fair.
I absolutely love Nashville, so I'd be thrilled to be invited to that. You've invited me to other ones like that, and I think they always go very well. They're very well received, so count me in.
Okay, well, the constraint that I have is the Fastener Fair in Nashville. I think it'll be fine. It's right before the next week is the Hydrogen Embrittlement Conference. Okay, there's the under-over. And somebody know what that is. In France, the first week of June. So I would go, if I go to Fastener Fair, if I'm there, and I'll be there based on this, I'll be flying right out of Nashville to France, which I'm sure you can get a ticket from Nashville to France.
I would think you might have a few jumps, but you can get there.
All right, so I'm gonna work on that.
All right. Well, we're on the fly fastener calendar planning here with Fully Threaded Radio. We covered a lot of ground here. Any other stories you guys want to bring up? I mean, I know you're full of them.
Oh, I've got great stories.
We'll just dive into one. Let's throw one more out there before we wind this one up, because I know you guys have so much to say. Sometimes it's like standing on the edge. Where do you jump?
So another one of my favorites is I got a call from, there's a very famous football team. I won't mention who they are, but they're building their new stadium, and we get a call from the guys putting it up, and they're using tension control bolts. And it's 120 degrees on the field, and these bolts are sitting in the sun, and they don't understand why their tension control bolts are actually shearing in tension, which means the threads are giving way and they're actually pulling the bolt apart, and the spline never breaks off. And I was laughing. I said, well, do you think that lubrication has become way too efficient on those bolts? And they said, what are you talking about? Something's got to be wrong with the Skidmore, right? And I said, well, I don't think so. But why don't you take everything and put it in the trailer overnight, temperature controlled, and test it the next day and let me know. And believe it or not, I've never heard from them again, but I know that that stadium is standing, and I've seen a few ball games done on it, and it's truly amazing to me that guys are doing this day in and day out. Just something as simple as what's the quality of the lubrication on a bolt that requires lubrication is critical to installing the bolts. It's not the first thing that hits their mind. So we're working with the iron workers to get a lot more training on bolts, and it all steered out of that. And so we actually do. I'm only one guy, so I can't do all these training sessions. So we put together an online training course. And if anyone's interested, they can certainly reach out to us, and we'll hook them up for some free training. We do certify people, and so we charge for that. But you can learn a whole lot about bolt torque tension just by watching the videos that we've put up on our website, Skidmore-training.com.
Okay, so that's Skidmore-training.com.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of free information there. We try and support, but we also want to be a resource where if somebody's willing to put in the time to actually learn it and take some tests about what they learned, they can get certified. And it's directed towards structural bolting, but we are about to get accredited by hopefully the Ironworkers Labor Management Conference. We will allow people will be able to get CE credits for taking our class online. So we think that's a good 10th step. We've taken the first 9. The next step is to actually get people to want to do it, give them some incentive to do it. And we think CE credits is one way to do it.
Well, that's the kind of endorsement that you need. And then I would also say that you should strive to make Skidmore-Wilhelm the official torque tensioning device of the NFL.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if they, I tend not to give names because no one wants to be associated with a project that, we hear about it when usually things are going wrong.
Oh, no, I'm in favor of all that. I mean, it adds drama to the segment, so yeah. Fire away if you can. I know it's not Minnesota because you said it was 120 degrees. So
yes, exactly.
I'm guessing it's somewhere down south.
You can figure it out.
And what was their season this year?
Big screens. That's all I'm going to say.
Got it.
I have a story for you, Eric. But before I do that, John, let's collaborate a little bit because I love bolting training. I prefer the in-person, hands-on, do it in my lab kind of training. And if there's a way to bring what you have into the lab or even take it on the road in a live venue somewhere, let's think about how to do that.
I'd love it. Because the one piece we're missing with our online training is the hands-on. And doing a lot of ironworker training as I do, I spend about 30 minutes in the classroom and an hour and a half in the shop, actually getting these guys to tighten bolts, guys and girls. There are a lot of females joining the ironworker ranks these days, which is fantastic. And the light bulbs go off when they actually tighten a bolt and something goes wrong. They don't hit the tension that they need, and there's a reason behind it. So let's figure out what the reason is.
Well, what kind of a time investment would you say is adequate for a solid background in this field, John?
I would say 2.5 hours of combination classroom and hands-on.
Okay.
And
we're gonna agree to disagree on that, John, because I think it's more like 2.5 days.
Okay.
We'll talk about that later. Hey, So a different story comes to mind because of what you just said about the ladies. Now, at the last NFDA meeting here in San Diego, we had this cool fishing trip, and I did a lab tour, and we cooked the fish at the lab tour, and it was great. And one of the things I demonstrated at the lab tour.
What kind of batter did you use, Carm?
Oh, it was Eric Dudas's special formula.
It was my recipe, wasn't it?
Oh, nice. I gotta get that.
And it's a real special feeling. It wasn't like we went out and shot a deer and ate it, but we caught these fish on the bottom of the ocean and brought them home and made fish tacos out of them, and they were the best. However, and we'll do that again, by the way. However, the next day we have the lab tour, and lots of people from the NFDA were there, and I was really pleased that the BBI owners, John and Peggy, were there. And I was demonstrating the Skidmore-Wilhelm bolt tension calibrator, doing the PIV test of some tension control bolts. And there were also a lot of other ladies. And I encouraged, if there was a lady in the group, I tried to encourage them to come up and set the tension control bolt, because I said, there are very few female iron workers. And if you're not an iron worker, chances are you've never, ever even seen this, let alone done it. So you'd be a rare person, being a female, to come up here and set the TC bolt. And they almost always did it. And in the shear wrench, the special wrench you do this with, it's heavy. And then there's another wrench you have to use to get it out, which we call Black Beauty. It's a big honking impact wrench. It sounds like a cannon going off when you use it. So next group had John and Peggy, and I tried to get them to come up, and they wouldn't do it. And then I said, wait a minute, you sell bucket loads, container loads of these bolts all around the world. Have you ever set one of these things? And neither one of them said they had. And I shamed Peggy into coming up and setting the TC bolt, and it was great. First time she had ever done it. She says, now I know how it works. So that was fun. And I feared that it would have been embarrassing to me if neither one of them would have decided to do it. So I'm so glad. If you hear this, Peggy, thank you so much. It was a hoot. Now I'm going to go to a more serious story. Actually, my very first foray into having a problem to solve on the job site using the Skidmore. And it turns out, in this case, the problem was the Skidmore. And I hesitate to say this because John is here, but people need to know about this very rare but peculiar problem that can happen when the Skidmore is not properly maintained.
All right, fire away, Carm, because folks have come to depend on Fully Threaded to give it to them straight. So,
well, this is a straight story. But it might be like 20 years ago, I get a call, and I'm going to say all the names now because it's been long enough that doesn't matter. I get a call from Mark Cordova. Everyone knows who Mark is.
Yeah, Mark's great.
And he was at Cordova Bolt at the time. And he said, Carmen, there's a job in San Diego at the Mesa College, Community College. It's the Mesa College math building they're building. And they've rejected 9 lots of TC bolts that I sold them, and the job is shut down, and they're having a panic. They want to remove all the bolts, and they have a concrete pour on the 4th floor, the 3rd floor tomorrow or Monday. This was Thursday, Monday, and everybody's crapping their pants. Get over there. And I said, well, what am I going to do? And he said, well, we need to probably get a Skidmore. And I said, okay, I'll try to get one. He said, I have one. So he's got a Skidmore. I'm going to drive it down in the car right now. So he comes down. This is Thursday. He's there midday Thursday. He's got a Skidmore. It's not calibrated. Well, we can't show up on the job site with a Skidmore that's not calibrated. So I find a Cal Lab that can calibrate the Skidmore that day. I pick it up the next morning on the way to the job site. I get to the job site. I go to the trailer of the erector. This guy, his head is coming off. Big John, I can't remember his last name. It was Herrick Steel was the company. John is now retired, famous guy over there. And he's literally, he was threatened with a, what do you call that when you have to stay away from people?
Restraining
order
by the inspector trailer because he's going to tear them apart because he knows there's no way in hell that 9 lots of TC bolts can be bad. So that's the first clue, by the way. When someone has multiple TC bolts that aren't performing the PIV, it's probably their process or the
Skidmore setup, sure.
Or the Skidmore, maybe. And in this case, the TC bolts were all pulling low. very low and exactly the same. And it turns out that the Skidmore they were using, this company had like 20 Skidmores. This was an inspection company, and they had one that was always set up to pull just 7/8. So they kept a 7/8 plate on it. That's a luxury, by the way, to be able to keep your Skidmore just with one size. And I looked at their Skidmore, and I had our Skidmore, and we had all the plates and everything. And I noticed that they were using spacers for bolts that weren't that long. And the reason they were using spacers was because installed in the Skidmore were plates that are known as short pressure plates. And you only use those when you have very short bolts. There's like 2 lengths that you need the short plate for. And by the way, when the bolts are even too short for the Skidmore, there's a test you can do just in the steel without the Skidmore, but that's another story. So I said, have you examined these plates? They don't know anything about the plates. They've never changed them. They were using these short plates with every length of bolt with spacers for years. And the short plates, by virtue of being short, have thinner metal in them. And if you abuse them year after year after year, they can bow. And that little bit of bowing will result in the back plate and the front plate coming into contact when you tighten the bolt, which prevents the hydraulic pressure from increasing in the Skidmore. So what we did was we put my Skidmore, we had Skidmores at the OK Corral, and I do have video and photos on this. 2 Skidmores on an I-beam. One had to be upside down because we had them both on the same side of the I-beam. And we swapped plates. We put my plate on their Skidmore and the bolts passed. We put their plate on my Skidmore and the bolts failed. And I took that plate and I put it on a flat surface, which I think was the yellow box or the green box that the Skidmore came in. And I spun it like a top. And then you can put a flat, something that is a flat edge like a ruler across the back of it, and you'll notice it's bowed a little bit. And that's how you indicate that. And as we were doing this test, one of the things that really creeped me out is there was just a few people there. And then all of a sudden there were more people. And there were men in suits, and there were women in skirts. The building owner was the dean of the school or something having to do with the San Diego Community College District, and she was a woman, and this was a very important problem because they had the job shut down, and they had a cement pour scheduled for the top floor on Monday, and this was Friday afternoon. And they also made the mistake of my client was the bolt supplier, not Herrick Steel. My client was Cordova Bolt. And when I went into the inspector trailer, they hardly would pay any attention to me. I had to get their attention. I said, hey, I'm here to solve your problem. I represent the bolt supplier, not Herrick Steel. I think we can get this fixed if you'll give me some help. So they did. And we made this agreement that Thursday to show up on Friday and do this test. And the problem just went away. We got notice the bolts are fine. But the mistake they made was, and I will say this to all erectors, if you are doing your PIV test, which Herrick did as they were supposed to before they ever installed any of this bolting, they did the PIV test. They had the records. They invited the special inspector to witness the test. The special inspector either didn't get the invitation or declined, but didn't see it and insisted on doing their own. So when they went to do their own, they had this failure. Now, it's probably pretty rare that you actually have a PIV test where you invite the special inspector and they choose not to show. But I will tell you, as the erector, when you do your PIV test, if the inspector chooses not to attend, you make sure you have a record of that and email something that you can prove that they were invited and did not show up. Herrick should not have even let them do that test because that was not a requirement of the contract to have a secondary test. The test was done properly when it was supposed to be done, and they had a record of it, and those bolts passed. So that's one of the rare things that can happen when the Skidmore is not properly maintained. I don't know how many times you would have to abuse the Skidmore tightening long bolts in a short plate for that to happen, but clearly it's been thousands of times over the years because those plates had not been taken off that machine in anybody's memory. That was my very first job site where I had to show up and solve a problem. It went spectacularly well. And anyway, I tell that story almost in every structural bolt training that we give.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. I can give you a little bit of a history behind the short bolt plates. The original Skidmore unit was a Model M, and that's the one I have the serial number 102 back in my plant. And bolts were starting to get shorter. So our engineering department developed the Model MS, and the S stood for shorter bolt. And similarly, there was an H, and now there's the HS, which Carmen has, and that's for short bolts as well. And then bolts got even shorter. So our engineers said, well, let's, instead of making, because, the laws of physics, to test shorter bolts, we either need to make a much bigger Skidmore unit in terms of, it has to be much taller and wider, or we can create what we called short bolt plates, but we sell them with the caveat that these these plates and bushings will survive tens of thousands of tests, but eventually we know that the middle is so thin that based on the load you're putting on these plates and bushings, they can warp and they will need to be replaced. And the easy way to see it is by putting it on a flat table and they wobble. And to this day, we still get people who don't quite understand that, and they wonder why. You can test as long as you want, even if you're using the short bolt plate, but it's not a great idea, especially if you test a lot of bolts, because eventually you're going to wear that thing out, and exactly what happened to Carmen is going to happen to you. And the plate and the bushing are only, a fraction of an inch apart when we create the load in the Skidmore. And if they bend at all, they start touching, they're not going to go anywhere, and you're just going to break the bolt or not achieve any load in the Skidmore.
And the short bolts where you need the short plates for, as far as testing, are the vast minority. It doesn't happen that, I would say, less than 20% of the time. So make sure you only use the short plate for the short bolts, and they'll last forever.
Exactly. Yeah, they will last forever. We've never had one of those warp.
Well, I would imagine that folks who are listening to this part of the conversation are really, really into the particular subject of, torque tension testing and the nuances of it, because we covered a lot of the sort of the juicier parts at the top of the conversation and really dug in here as we've progressed, which is fine. But I would say that at this point, we probably want to take a look and see if there's anything coming down the road that we can advise people of and wrap it up from there.
Well, structural bolting wise, I have some very good news. The AISC and the RCSC have completed the new guide for high-strength stainless steel structural bolting. We'll be seeing that soon. And I will be doing lots of testing here at Carver Labs because ASTM is also in the process of developing a standard for high-strength stainless steel structural bolting, which is not commonly, but more commonly used in Europe. They know a lot more about it than we do. So some people in Europe, Nancy Badeau particularly in London, and Jason Provines at the I think University of West Virginia or Virginia,
yeah,
are working on that. And I got to head up the RCSC Oversight Committee, and we're reviewing that standard, and we should be done this month reviewing it, and then it should get published. So stainless steel is a peculiar animal. There are a lot of things that make it more difficult to work with than steel, but people want to build stuff out of stainless steel, so it's necessary. So look forward to that.
From my end, the good news is there's no news, but I would encourage people that want to learn more about this topic. We sell a lot of equipment, but as Carmen said, I have a passion for teaching people about torque tension, and we have a actually separate company doing the training, and we are very actively going to job sites. It's fortunately not me because I'm old enough and my kids are still in the house. I don't have to go to all these places all the time. I get to pick and choose when I go.
You've got people, John.
Yeah, I've got people to do that. So we are doing a lot of training. I mean, almost every week. He was in rural New York this week. I think he's going to Columbus, Ohio next week. So that's good news. Whenever anyone contacts us about training, It's usually because there was an issue, or they realized they just didn't know what they were coming up against. And we get fun stories all the time. Like the Florida DOT now requires anyone who's putting up street signs, those big street signs that are going up over highways in Florida, has to be certified by our online training program. Unbeknownst to us, they just declared it. They took the class. We probably gave it to them for free, and they took the class and said, okay, any steel erector has to go through this before we let them put structures over our highways, because you can imagine the liability of those signs coming down. So I'm extremely encouraged. Every time I see John Wilhelm, he smiles at me and he says, at some point we thought we would sell all the Skidmores that were needed to be sold. And this company just keeps plugging along, and it's because of people wanting to do better. And that's encouraging to me. And the fact that they're willing to take the time to do the training and listen to your podcast is really encouraging. I think it's excellent.
Well, we're speaking primarily to fastener distributors and also probably a handful of fastener manufacturers or people who are involved in it. Do you do much training that is specific to, say, their quality assurance facilities, those technicians working there?
So we have, and we will anytime they contact us. We don't proactively look for those situations because it usually falls on deaf ears. But I try and do them as often as I can. And I was thrilled when Carmen, back in the day, I don't know, Carmen, was this 10 years ago? You invited me to do, I called it the Monday session. Every fastener training week, Carmen would give me Monday afternoon, and I would come and do my little dog and pony. And I would get a lot of training sessions out of that. People were interested in that. We weren't selling a lot of equipment, but that wasn't the point. The point was, hey, you need to know what's going on when your customer calls and they're having a problem. And so I'm thrilled to do those kind of things, and it's frankly free. If it's too much expense, I might ask you to share in my travel costs, but we would love to come out and do any kind of hands-on training that anyone wants.
Fire that contact info out there again, please, John.
So I'm John O'Brien, Skidmore-Wilhelm.com. My email is JOBRIEN@Skidmore-training.com.
All
right. And you're still out there, Carm. What do you got to say to wrap this up?
Well, my wind down is, John, you and your beautiful wife have to come out here to San Diego. I know she loves the area. And
she's a native, yeah.
We'll do one of those training programs in our lab here. And I have lots of people that are begging me to do it. Distributors, that job site I was on, every bolting guy there said, we need this bad. So let's make sure that happens.
Well, that's excellent.
Well, my only request is time it for sometime when there's a good bite on out there off the coast, and I'll come too, and we'll catch some fish and fry them up.
My request is do it when it's cold here and I can come out and visit San Diego and get a week of warmth in.
Well, we're going to do clinics, and the clinics will be something like a half day, but we also are going to do a 2.5 day program that is called infrastructure fastening, where it's not just structural bolting. We'll do large bolts, embeds, self-drilling screws, all the things that, go into putting a building together.
Fascinating. Sounds great.
All right, guys. Well, we've been talking with John O'Brien. He's the Skidmore-Wilhelm guy, and hope you've enjoyed hearing some of the background on that, in case you were unaware. And, of course, Carmen Vertullo, longtime friend of the podcast. Sure do appreciate you being here, guys, and I know we'll be hearing from you in the future.
Thanks, Eric. Look forward to seeing you both soon.
Thanks. We'll see you around.
Fully Threaded Radio is a production of Fasteners Clearinghouse.